So now that we have gone into Hitler's stockpile and shocking moments and threats, let's lighten the load here and let's talk about some great success that we've had or are experiencing now. Some good news that can share with the audience something to feel good about and to learn more about. And I want to say that all of us in this business, we do this sustainably. Vandana has been doing this on GMOs since the 80s. Hardly anyone has that length of time. And you are still going strong. So I'm going to give one hint here. We hear the outrageous stories, but it doesn't stab us in a way that depletes us. It actually, I can speak for myself, it strengthens our resolve. And it doesn't beat us down so that it is sustainable. And part of the reason it's sustainable is the good news that we are creating as well as watching. So who would like to go first? You've been going third each time. Would you like to go first?
No,
Caitlin?
wait, what's the question? Sorry.
Share some good news that's happening in this field that can convey information about what's happening and that gives you a sense of optimism or hope.
I don't know about in this field, but in my home state of Maine, lots of young farmers are either coming back or staying or moving to Maine, and they are determinedly growing organic, and they are trying all kinds of different things. We've got hoop houses, and all across the state, we're growing lettuces all winter long, and it's cold in Maine. And we're trying very hard to become a state that produces a lot of our own food. We're actually growing rice, which is unusual. We're growing soybeans, many kinds of beans, lots of staple foods, and we're trying to distribute these through farmers markets and WIC and all kinds of different programs to people of all economic levels. And we just voted in our first female governor in November, whose number one item on the agenda is climate change. And she's absolutely interested in farming and looking at the farming sector and how farming not only affects climate change, but what can we do to educate people and feed people from what we're growing in our own state. And those things give me hope. The young, intrepid farmers who are working so hard and growing food all winter long. And I'm born and raised in Maine. And I lived in Paris and then Providence and then New York City and Los Angeles. But I came back to Maine in 2003 to make my home. And just in the time that I've been there, that's 15 years, the farming has taken off. The farmers markets are amazing. The fact that we're trying to grow things like rice, rice is something that is grown in rice paddies, obviously. It needs a lot of water. We have a big arsenic problem with a lot of rice. Maine farmers are trying to figure this out on cleaner soil, if possible. In Maine, of course, we have rainwater and pollution and all those other things that pollution comes to us in the clouds. But that gives me hope. I'm excited about what the farmers in my home state are doing, and I'm excited about our new governor, who for the first time really wants to make change with our state. And there's an old adage in Maine, which is that as Maine goes, so goes the nation. And I think these days, many of us in Maine are hoping, as Maine goes, so goes the world.
Carey?
You're looking at me?
Yep.
What was the question?
You've got lots of good news.
She and I talked about this over a glass of wine before the panel. And we talked about Maine, and we talked about farmers who are giving me hope. I'm learning and spending time with and talking to a group of farmers that call themselves the IDEA Network, IDEA, IDEA Network. And these are farmers around the Midwest in the United States, and some of them are organic growers, some are conventional, some are transitioning, but essentially they are trying to be sort of our researchers and our scientists for our future food production. And they have a little bit of grant money from the USDA, and they're working in conjunction with a couple of universities. But essentially what they're trying to do is figure out how to grow wheat and corn and soybeans without pesticides, without the heavy use of synthetic herbicides and insecticides and fungicides. And they're coming up, I mean, essentially they're going back really to historic ways of farming, you know, where they're employing different cover crops or different types of rotations. They're looking at row spacing, things like row spacing, which I wouldn't think would make a big deal necessarily, but they're finding that, you know, narrowing the row spacing in certain circumstances, and then the canopy of the crops, you know, would cover the ground, and the different types of row, you know, you suppress weeds that way. If you have different things that you plant as borders around can affect the insect population, and different things you can do to the soil to increase the microbial population in the soil can affect the health of the plant, and maybe you don't need the fungicide because they're not so vulnerable to disease. And they're experimenting, and they're trying to match or beat yields with crops that are grown with pesticides. And they're really finding some innovative things, and they're reporting this. And so that gives me a lot of hope. The other thing is that food companies that I talk to and that I've met with, you know, what they care about is the bottom line, right? I mean, maybe they say they care about the health of their consumers and everything, but what they really care about is the bottom line. And the bottom line is being impacted because consumers are becoming aware and becoming educated, and consumers are voting with their wallet. And so they buy organic food, or they buy food that says non-GMO, or they're tracking, these companies are tracking this, and they're saying, consumers are onto us to a certain extent, right? So they watched what happened with GMOs and how consumers became so passionate about that and tried to pass all of these laws in different states, and they see that coming for pesticides. And so the companies are trying to get in front of it, and they're contracting with growers to try to help them figure out ways to grow food with fewer pesticides or with no pesticides. They're investing in organic production, farmers, all the way up and down the supply chain. You're seeing that kick in to a certain degree. I think, and I write about this in the book, I think that we're really at a critical juncture because you're seeing the food companies, you're seeing the consumers, the farmers are realizing this. There's this movement to transition away from these, you know, health damaging, environmentally damaging pesticides. But you see the companies that are making money off of that saying, oh no, you don't, you know, and they're really pushing back. They're trying to create preemptive legislation that would ban cities and states and municipalities from banning pesticides. They're in there trying to, you know, reinforce policy in Washington that's going to keep on pushing those pesticides down our throats, and the farmers are coming out with new genetically engineered seeds, you know, that tolerate other herbicides. So I think it's a real push-pull right now. It's a real critical time. And it's ever more important then for consumers to encourage farmers who are looking at these alternatives to keep on doing that.
Can I just jump in on one thing, just to tag what she said, which is that that I think that's so true, that consumers are starting to demand something different, and that is also really hopeful. Yeah. One of the people that I keep bringing this back to my home state, forgive me, it's exciting to be proud of Maine again. I wasn't so proud when we had our former governor. But the Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, who's a congresswoman from our state, her office was involved in a poll where, and I write about this in the book. She's in my book because the book had so many men in it. One of the women, a friend of mine read it, and she said, can you find some women to put in this book, please? All of these scientists, all these ag people, they're all men. Enter Shelley Pingree, our congresswoman. So anyways, she did a poll where her office did a poll, or they were involved in a poll where they went out and they asked mothers, young mothers, with young babies. What did they want to feed their babies? Not what could they afford, but what did they want to feed them? And they went everywhere. They went to Aroostook County, Maine. They went to the Midwest. They went to Harlem. They went down south. They went everywhere. And it didn't matter what the education background was. It didn't matter the color of their skin. And it didn't matter, what their religion was. Every mother that was asked said, we want the organic baby food. We want the good stuff. That didn't mean they could pay for it and they could have it. But that's what they wanted for their babies. Nothing else mattered. And that, although it kind of breaks your heart, also gives me hope, because I think that people realize that innately mothers want to do the best thing for their kids. The other thing that kind of gives me hope, and back to the consumer issue and farmers changing, is that I wrote about a very handsome young farmer named Zach Honeycutt in my book. I met him in Nebraska, and I spent a lot of time with him and talking to him. By the end of my book, he had changed, and I don't know that it had anything to do with me. It probably didn't. I think it was market driven, but he was wholesale into growing the GMOs, and I outline in the book the incredible cocktail of pesticides that he sprayed on his crops, which was probably the most shocking part for me of spending time in the Midwest. I had no idea how many pesticides went on these crops and how many of them were mixed together. But what did give me hope is that through our conversations and also through just consumer pressure, by the time I was done with the book, when I called him up at the end and I was writing the epilogue, some of his views had changed, and he was starting to grow some non-GMO crops. He was starting to back off on some of his pesticides. He had a brother who had gotten very sick, and I write about all this in my book, but that journey, that narrative arc of his was amazing to behold, and that gave me some hope too.
Good.
I'm very grateful to Monsanto for all the hope they've created. I wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing if it wasn't for what they were doing and wanted us to do. And when I started, I just wanted to save seeds, and I'll talk more about it tomorrow. But today, 31 years later, we find that just by saving biodiversity and growing biodiversity, we can grow more nutrition and food for people. Our calculations show we could feed 2 times India's population by just protecting biodiversity. We found that while everywhere the industrial system is making farmers' incomes collapse, just fair ecological systems are able to enhance farmers' incomes tenfold. And this is actually hundreds of farmers who are seed sovereign, who are food sovereign, and who are market sovereign. And we've just added a new one, knowledge sovereign. Because the mining, this new digital agriculture is based on first tracking what the farmer does, tracking what the soil is, and then selling back that data to the poor farmer. So as long as we hold on to our minds and its sovereignty, we'll be all right. Yeah. We work with Navdanya, the movement I started, we primarily work with farmers, but we also work with governments where governments are willing. And 6 states of India have made commitments to go organic. And 1 state, Sikkim, is 100% organic. 100% organic. We're helping Bhutan make a transition to organic because Bhutan, as you know, did not take the maximizing of the GDP as its object of planning. Mm-hmm. So it threw away the gross domestic product and gross national product, and the king announced that what he would do is maximize the happiness and well-being of his people. So what they measure is gross national happiness. And I got a letter from the last prime minister saying, I can't see us growing happiness in any other way than growing organic. Will you help us? So we are helping them. And the most beautiful is, all of Navdania's communities, their pledge is, we're not going to allow seed patenting, we're not allow GMOs and chemicals in our village. And our village will be an organic village. We have hundreds and thousands of communities. So 2 years ago, we were celebrating the mountains. Basically, we celebrate the earth. And that year was listening to the mountains. And I got a book to write a foreword for on the issues of pesticide in a tiny village called Mars in the Alps, in South Tyrol. So I just wrote back to the publishers and I said, we're doing a festival on the mountains and it wouldn't be bad to have this village come, because they had declared themselves pesticide free. And the mayor came and we had the most beautiful ceremony. The chief minister of Sikkim was there, the mayor of Little Mars was there, and our women from the mountains of Garhwal, from where I come. And they took a pledge to make a poison-free world of food and farming by the year 2050. And a farm at a time, a plate at a time, a village at a time. 2050 is a long way off.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the point is, if we don't do it, we'll be dead anyway, so might as well do it.
That's a good one. That's the bottom line. If you don't do it, you're dead anyway.
One of the biggest pieces of good news that I got, I was actually skeptical about it. It was in 2008. I had been traveling around the world, maybe visited 25 countries by then, speaking about the dangers of GMOs. But people who would come up to me and say, I can tell when I eat a GMO. I can feel the difference. I was skeptical. I didn't fully believe them. I figured the results of GMOs would be seen as a slight trend in epidemiological graphs long after people had gotten sick. But after speaking to the medical community about GMOs starting in 2006, I returned to a conference in 2008 with a video camera, and I listened to the doctors who had been prescribing non-GMO diets, and they told me people do get better, predictably, reliably, and they could even tell me what got better, how long it took. The anxiety, the depression, the allergies, the asthma, the digestive problems. And I was a little skeptical, and I said, can I go to your office and talk to your patients? And yes, indeed, I did, and it was remarkable. So I started asking audiences in 2012 to share the same answers, and at 150 lectures got the same answer. And a survey of 3,256 people got the same answer. In medical conferences asking doctors about the effects of prescribing non-GMO diets and organic diets, the same answer. And now we have the film, Secret Ingredients, about more than a dozen people who switched to organic, and the autistic kids are no longer autistic, the infertile couples have babies, the people who had cancer went into remission. All these different serious diseases and disorders were reversed when people switched their diet. I don't believe everyone has that impact, for sure. But the physicians in the film were saying, yes, this is exactly what we see in a significant percentage of our patients. So to me, when I really dialed in on that fact, that this was a reliable, predictable, consistent outcome, that people can expect to feel better, have more energy, less brain fog, better digestion, better mood, I realized we have a greater engine now to drive the movement, because everyone wants to feel good, and so many people are sick. And we now have more evidence linking GMOs and Roundup specifically to these diseases. So the good news is it works. changing the diet, and people are talking about it. And I predict that within a couple of years, more and more of the diseases that we believe are related to GMOs, the people who have those diseases, it'll be, oh yeah, you've got to go organic. A lot of people with gluten sensitivity, oh yeah, Roundup and GMOs may be causing that. That's already being established. I think it's going to be established with cancer, established with infertility, established with digestive disorders, established with mood and behavioral disorders. And that it'll become very, very well known because people will be able to tell their stories. So that to me is great news. And please tell your stories if you have them to share.